The Buffalo Bills will be stressed in some new ways against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
And Mitch Morse might have a lot to do with that stress because he's a former Bill.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bills and Locked On Jaguars. As always, we're thankful that you made us your first listen like you do every single day, both Locked On Bills, Locked On Jaguars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, we'd love for you to take a second to make sure that you are subscribed or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, the host of Locked On Bills, joined by Tony Wiggins, the outstanding host of Locked On Jaguars, and we're here to get you ready for Monday Night Football, Week 3, Orchard Park, the 2-0 Bills hosting the 0-2 Jaguars. Tony, my guy, looking forward to this conversation since the schedule came out. It's good to be here with you.
Good to be here with you too, man. I didn't quite expect the records to be what they are right now, but I guess that's the conversation. That's it. The fact that you guys are 2-0 and look like world beaters, and the Jags are 0-2 and are already pointing fingers and questioning each other.
Well, Tony, that was the first question I had for you. Is this Jaguars team's talented? There's no question. They have the players on this roster to be a good football team, but they've been really streaky under Doug Peterson now into his third season. And so 0-2, tight losses both to Miami and Cleveland. And listen, Bills Mafia is not happy about that Dolphins game getting away from the Jaguars. But what are you seeing, man? Like, what are the contributing factors here in these games getting away from Jacksonville?
They got a little stink on them, man, and that stink it comes from their history, and they got to be able to shake that stuff off. It's Murphy's Law. Whatever can go wrong seemingly goes wrong at the wrong time. For instance, the game you're talking about against Miami, dominated it for 43 minutes and lost because of the last 17 minutes. The game against Cleveland were dominated for about 40 minutes and still lost because the 20 minutes that they tried to get it together and play with a lot of desperation, it just did not happen. And the worst thing about it is, after 2 weeks, Trevor Lawrence said, yeah, we suck. Period. Point blank in the discussion. That's it. Doug Peterson said, at this point, we've been together long enough that we shouldn't come out and play like this. This is 2 weeks into the season. And if anything, that just points to the fact that people don't have answers already. And now we're expecting those people that don't have the answers, that have their finger on the pulse of the team, we're expecting them to actually provide them when they have to go on the road against Buffalo on Monday night and then to Houston the very next week. I think it's 0-4, and I think the heat is going to start getting turned up around here. I hope they surprise me, and I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't see them beating either one of those teams on the road.
Well, I'll tell you, despite maybe how the optics look, Bills Mafia feels like the Jacksonville Jaguars are a bit of the Bills' kryptonite. I mean, you go back to the London game last year and even the Urban Meyer year when the Jaguars were at rock bottom in a year where the Bills were as good of a team as there was in the NFL. Jaguars got that football game, right? It's been a really interesting series between these two teams. And so it kind of feels like one of those situations where, from at least the Bills side of things, you're throwing sort of the records out of the equation here because the Bills kind of have to prove it against a Jacksonville team that's played them tough throughout the years.
I have a theory for that. And the theory is that when you're playing a team like Buffalo, they're pretty straightforward. We ain't trying to disguise a whole bunch of stuff, man. We play in Buffalo. We actually have the identity of our community. We're tough. We're just going to line up in front of you and say, yeah, what's up? The teams that the Jaguars are playing, first week in Miami, a lot of misdirection. And then Stefanski with what he was doing last week because he was shorthanded on the offensive line. They really wanted to limit possessions and dial certain things up and basically win first downs as if first downs counted on the scoreboard. And that's exactly what they did. And then they were able to limit the Jaguars because of their stellar play with guys on every single level. You look at their team on every single level, they have really, really good personnel and they communicate really well. I think the Jaguars struggle against teams that scheme them up. I don't think they struggle with teams that go, come on, let's go outside and just have a fight, me and you. And Buffalo is that type of team. And you admit it yourself. Jacksonville's full of big, strong guys that can really, really play. Yeah. So playing them straight up and just challenging their manhood allows them to stay competitive in the game. I think they get in trouble when teams start doing other stuff. It's almost as if it's a really good Power 5 team playing against North Dakota State. You don't know what they're going to do. And they're good enough to beat you if you're not careful. But that Power 5 team in college may play another Power 5 team, and all of a sudden the game is easier for them because they're just bigger and stronger.
Really want to ask you about Trevor Lawrence, and I want the truth, man. Like,
all right,
he's number one pick, big time pedigree, gets the massive contract. You watch him at times, you feel like he's $1 million, and then it feels like maybe situationally things can get away from him. Some very costly fumbles and lack of execution in big moments, but he's also had big moments. Tony, what's the truth on Trevor Lawrence?
It's Jay Cutler-ish, and I hate that because there's a big variance. I said in the past, I watched Jay Cutler play Aaron Rodgers in some games, and Aaron Rodgers is one of the top 3 most talented people I've ever seen, and Jay Cutler wasn't far behind. And then I watched Jay Cutler play other games, and it's like, why on earth would he do that? And I think that's what it is with Trevor Lawrence. There's a throw he made against Miami, the touchdown to Brian Thomas Jr. in the end zone. Yeah, it's like 6 or 7 guys in this league can do that. And he has the legs. He talks the game the way it's supposed to be talked about. He takes things on himself. He doesn't point fingers. He blames himself before anything. He doesn't run from it. He's big. He's statuesque. He's mobile. I just think that Trevor Lawrence is the same guy he was at Clemson. And the problem is with that is he didn't lose a lot of games, but when he lost them all, they all look the same. Every game he loses looks exactly the same, which means that's an identity. That's a negative identity. But it's almost unfair because I think he's run behind a porous offensive line since he's gotten into the NFL, and he's never been able to do some of the things that other quarterbacks around the league have been able to do, and just depend on your talent and depend on your progressions. There always has seemed to be a lack of talent at one important position or another. The Jaguars running backs get hit when they get the ball quicker than any other running backs in the National Football League over the last couple of years. That means the offensive line isn't protecting the way it's supposed to in the run game, which means play action is now a waste of time. That's a waste of time for him to have his back turned to the defense and then him have to turn around and process really quickly because, one, it didn't work. They don't respect the run. And then the other thing is now you have to process through a defense that isn't respecting the run, and they're back. They have more people in coverage, and you have to fit the ball into tight windows, which forces him to play hero ball, which is a death sentence to any quarterback. I don't care who you are.
I want to ask you about Ryan Nielsen in this Jaguars defense. I think a lot of Ryan Nielsen. I think he's a good young defensive coordinator, and it's hard to put much of this 0-2 start on him and that side of the football. But one thing that's really been fascinating to me about the style of defense that they're playing a ton of man coverage, 63.3% man coverage, number 1 in the NFL. Denver's number 2 at 51.9%. I mean, they have a commanding lead when it comes to running man coverage. Now, I wonder how much of that was we want to test Tua, we want to test Deshaun Watson, and really see if they can make tight throws against tight coverage. What are your expectations for this game? Because no Tyson Campbell, you would feel like that's a big part of the recipe for running man coverage. I don't necessarily look at Monteric Brown as that type of corner. Ronald Darby, yeah, I think he is more of a man coverage corner. Do you think they continue to play man against Buffalo, or is this an opportunity for them to kind of mix up some of their coverage looks?
They're going to be who they are. And while I can appreciate the question, I can tell you when he took this job, they talked about playing press man and man bail. And they talked about things processing very, very quickly and using their front seven to initiate pressure, to keep everything in front of them, to give up no big plays because they're going to make you make a decision really, really fast. Tyson Campbell is out. They continue to do it. Monteric Buster Brown is actually paid probably a little bit better than we give him credit for. The Jaguars are giving up an average of 19 points in 2 games from 2 pretty decent teams. Miami is very, very explosive, and the two have played the entire game. And then this past week, the disappointing part was they couldn't take advantage of the fact that Cleveland had 2 backup tackles, and then at one point, Jones went out, the right tackle, the second-year player out of Ohio State. He went out, and they had a third-string guy in who was on the practice squad early in the week, and they couldn't. Now, I think they played a little bit. I think they call it a cage, where I know Seattle used to call it a gap and hole, where because of Watson's mobility, you don't want to get past his armpits.
Right.
So I think getting upfield was out of the question. It was more bull rushes and more twist action on the inside, but it still didn't work. And Cleveland was able to get too many first downs. It ended up with 34 minutes of time of possession. And I really do think limiting Jaguars possessions, mainly in the first half, just put them to sleep, and they just couldn't get out of that hole in the second half. But Nielsen has been great. The results have been mixed a little bit because of the time of possession issue, but what he's trying to do is actually something that is being done. So usually you get guys that say they're going to try something and it doesn't really pan out that way. No, teams will have to go really, really quick, and they're making guys process things really, really fast and get the ball out quick. So that's his goal, and it hasn't changed since Tyson Campbell got hurt.
Tony, I want to sneak one more in, and I got to ask you about Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis, two really good players for the Buffalo Bills for a number of seasons, and they're both now in Jacksonville. What have you seen from those two former players?
The last game against Cleveland, Gabe didn't play so well. He maybe had one drop, but against Miami, no, actually, let me switch that. Didn't play well against Miami, played better against Cleveland. So I got those two things mixed up. It's still real hard to figure out. He missed a key block last week that would have resulted in a very, very big play. But it's still real hard to gauge what Mitch Morse is. Now, the analytics say that he's playing really, really well. But as you know, on that offensive line, they'll all look bad, man, if just one guy is not looking good. And it hasn't been really, really good for Trevor Lawrence. So there are a lot of people that thought all we needed was a center from last year because Luke Fortner was so terrible. I always caution people to not think that it's just one thing. And so far, even though Morse has played way better than Fortner, the offense has still not been able to be consistently a threat enough to get them wins in games and to get more points than they've been getting. So mixed reviews so far. We'll have to see if it's just not the total problem. And there looks like there's more things that's going on than just putting those two guys in those spots.
All right, coming up on the other side of it, we're going to flip the script. Tony's going to find out whatever he wants to know about the Bills, folks. Be sure to stick with us. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Josh Allen rookie card just isn't in the cards. I love collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Arena Club is the only repack that provides a real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Arena Club slap packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your polls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auction. The Arena Club grading process is accurate, fast, and transparent with a full grade rationale provided, an explanation of how your card was scored. Whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform that you have to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnNFL, code LockedOnNFL for 10% off your first purchase. All right, Tony, what you got, brother?
All right, segment 2 here on the Prize Picks crossover here on Thursday, Jaguars at Bills. Here's what I want to know from you, Joe Marino, and I know you're going to give me the good. So I sat there and I looked at the Bills early in the offseason with all of their attrition that they had, a lot of names, a lot of veterans, whether it be Jordan Poyer, Stephon Diggs, and the two you mentioned that play for us now. And I'm thinking, like, has their window closed? How have the Bills been able to, and I think it's a player development question maybe, but how have they been able to lose such big productive names and then still overachieve and end up 2-0 and probably one of the top 5 teams in the National Football League based on power rankings right now without Josh Allen throwing more than 43 total passes in the first 2 games? I did not think it was possible for them to have a different identity. What has been the key component to them being able to do that, get off to such a good start after the attrition?
Yeah, it's year 8 for Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. There's a system in place. There's alignment between the front office and the coaching staff of what they want to be and the types of players and the type of schemes that they want to run. And so it's all about life cycles in the NFL. And eventually your nucleus is going to expire and you have to transition away from players. And if you have a level of sustained success, that's going to happen because rosters become expensive and the NFL is a limited resource environment with a salary cap, and you just can't keep all the players all the time forever. And so the Bills are at the point with their previous nucleus where they just had to move on from some guys and weren't able to retain some young players as well, like a Gabe Davis. And you have to trust that you have a foundation in place, a system of philosophy that you subscribe to that allows you to have sustained success. Now that starts with having a quarterback like Josh Allen, right? That's going to be the number one leading factor as to why the Bills are always going to be a contending type team. But it's the entire picture here. And the Bills have had some very good foundational draft classes recently that's replenished and positioned a lot of young players. I mean, people say goodbye to Tre'Davious White. Maybe it's time to learn about who Christian Benford is, right? They say goodbye to Gabe Davis. Well, probably need to figure out who Khalil Shakir is before you overreact to that type of a move. Oh, Mitch Morse has been a great center for the Bills for a long time. Well, they drafted Osiris Torrance. They signed Connor McGovern. They like those types of players. There's a system in place for how this is supposed to go. And even they've had some attrition on the defensive side of the football this year. Key players like a Matt Milano, like a Taron Johnson, like a Terrell Bernard, key players on the second level, they're able to not have those players right now because there's experienced depth that's ready to step in and fill in those moments. And so from a national level, it was kind of frustrating to watch the Bills' funeral play out this last offseason because people just don't know what's actually happening. And I'm sure that's happens to some extent in Jacksonville, where on a national level, they just don't quite know the nuances of what's happening with the football team. But the reality is the Bills have been preparing for this. There's young talent in the pipeline, and they needed a roster reset because it was 8 years into a build.
You know what? I have a bit of an analogy for that. I say when a GM is out people hunting, personnel hunting. Let's assume he's going to a grocery store, right? Well, don't go to a grocery store hungry, because if you go in there hungry, you're gonna get all perishable stuff that you're gonna probably dig into while you're driving in the car, right? You go to the grocery store when you're full. You're not hungry. You're gonna pack your pantry. Not only are you gonna pack your freezer. And the Jaguars haven't done that, and it seems that the Bills have. So my next question is this. With Josh Allen getting all of the Patrick Mahomes comparisons, and all of this probably started when the Bills were the ones that traded the pick to the Chiefs for them to get the LeBron James of the NFL right now, and Patrick Mahomes. And then you guys later got Josh Allen the next year. And there's always been this comparison. And all of a sudden that gap went away, and Josh Allen was thought of to be right up there in the same stratosphere. How do you convince that kid to only throw the ball 43 times in 2 games? Yeah. Has he also bought into this thing? And is it a situation where we're just going to do this now until we learn and our receivers grow and we can get Keon Coleman and we're going to suck people in and eventually we're going to turn you loose?
Yeah, I think credit to the Chiefs. I think that they figured out that it's not just the off-script big plays down the field that are important. You have to be able to play within structure, and you have to be able to play mature quarterbacking. And when they traded away Tyreek Hill and the vertical elements of that offense went away, there was a lot of question marks. But in reality, I think it was a very good move for them to not only replenish their roster with assets and not pay a lot of money to Tyreek Hill, but it allowed Patrick Mahomes to embrace doing the smart right thing with the football, right? A lot of quick game, getting the ball out of his hands, and then you sprinkle in the cool off-script stuff that you need to when necessary. I think if you look at an NFL football game and there's 70 plays offensively run, I think most quarterbacks are probably the same for 55, 60 of those plays. It's 10 plays a game, really, that makes it different. And I think for so long, the NFL has been trying to scratch and claw to find outliers like a Mahomes or a Josh Allen to make these off-script quarterbacks play within their box, but then, they're not really able to play within the box. They're good because in college they have physical skills that allows them to beat up on lesser opponents, but they just don't run the offense. You still got to run the offense. And I think there's a maturity that's happened with Josh Allen, at least early this season, that is he's embracing a role. You know, he's of course he has to put on the cape. He did it against Arizona, 4 touchdowns, right? Carried the team to from a come from behind win. But then flash forward 1 week, 19 passing attempts. Josh Allen goes 13 of 19. You hand the ball to James Cook. You win a football game by 3 touchdowns because you didn't have to do that crazy stuff. And so I think there's a maturity that's required for these quarterbacks to be able to settle in, run the offense, and understand when to sprinkle in the off-script stuff that people fall in love with. So I think that's what you're seeing across the league. Look at Will Levis. Look at Caleb Williams, man. These guys are struggling because they don't know how to play from the pocket with consistency, and they want to rely on, what do people say about Caleb Williams? Oh, he's playing like he did at USC. Really? Are you surprised that he's playing like the player he's always been? Right. There's a maturation that has to happen for these quarterbacks, even if they're super dynamic. And I think in a lot of ways, you've seen Josh Allen embrace that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of teams around the league. I just found out through some research yesterday that Derek Carr didn't even have over 20 attempts, and they beat Dallas. They beat Dallas to death. A lot of teams around the league, and this was pointed out by Matt Williamson, who's on Peacock and Williamson show, and he's my guest on Friday on the Locked On NFL show. He said, I think teams around the league have figured out that everybody just wants to stop big plays, and now you're seeing these long, sustained drives where first downs is now the currency because it's affecting the game, because it's wearing those defensive players out, and it's keeping the defense that you have on your own team fresh. You do that, you have a 12-play, 80-yard drive, and then they go 3 and out. Yikes. That's almost ball game. That is almost ball game when you think of the optics and what that means to a football team. So, yeah, the Jaguars don't have that identity. And the reason why I asked you that is because, you explained it very well, Buffalo has that identity and they have that trust, the trust from the personnel department to the coach and from the coach down to the players, and they've bought into it. And so far, y'all don't have questions like we suck and maybe our plan wasn't good. And that's the difference in these two football teams at this point.
Yeah, you have to be able to evolve. You have to be able to evolve your operation. It's, we talk about it being a year-to-year league. Nothing transfers from last year. It doesn't matter what you were last year, what you were good at, what you weren't good at. Every year's a new year, and you have to use your resources to build the best football team that you can and worry about yourself, right? Like worry about yourself and being the best football team that you can be, being mindful of league trends, and you have to anticipate things. And I think the teams right now that have anticipated well and adjusted their philosophies are the ones that have staying power. But football is looking different today than it did 5 years ago. And can you adjust within that or not? I think the teams that are going to be in it at the end are the ones that have figured that out and are zagging while everyone else is zigging.
Yep, you're right. I totally agree with you 100%.
All right. Coming up on the other side of it, folks, we're going to get into our most important things for each team to do to come away with a win. So be sure to stick with us. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, got a little something different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All that you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills. Tony Wiggins, host of Locked On Jaguars. It's time to talk about the most important thing or things for each team to do to win this football game. Tony, 0-2 Jags coming into Orchard Park. What's on the top of the list? What are those top 3 things that have to be true for Jacksonville to come in and give the Bills their first loss of the season?
All right, the first thing is mental. The first thing is you got to leave the stink of last week. Don't get on a plane with it. And that's probably easier said than done because you can be motivated by it, but even sometimes that is bad because now you're pressing and you're trying too hard. So this is a new game. You have to treat it like a corner that just got beat for a touchdown. Next play, next game, start all over. And functionally in the football game, I think some of the things that they have to do is make sure that when they're on the field defensively, obviously contain Josh Allen in the pocket. Do not let him on 3rd and 5, scramble for 6 yards. You have to get them off the field on 3rd down. And then when you're on offense and you're Jacksonville, obviously the goal is to make sure you convert 3rd downs. And I think they'll have some success at doing that. I really believe they have to score touchdowns when they cross the 50-yard line. They have to finish drives with touchdowns. And one of the ways that they can do that is maybe go with some max protect and try to hit Brian Thomas Jr. deep. He is a real good football player. He is fabulous. I think he is a future superstar. He should be the guy that Trevor Lawrence goes and tells ownership, look, whatever you got to do for the next 10 years, that's my dude, because he has been outstanding. He's been open a lot more than his statistics will suggest. But I think they have to learn who to lead with. You can't just use your depth and keep running all of these different combinations. No, when you're struggling, you have to look at your best players, the dudes that you gave all of this money to, the dudes that you invested all of these resources in. On offense, it has to be Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Brian Thomas Jr. And I don't care if you have to go to them until Buffalo stops them. You continue to do it. You put pressure on them by using your best players, even if you have to dial something up. And you can't keep going with this, well, we got all of these weapons and all of these people rotating in and out. No. Go with your best players until you find an identity and win the game. But when they cross the 50-yard line, they have to get touchdowns, because if they don't, I think they're going to end up losing yet another close game on the road.
Tony, it's interesting that you talk about the best players, the identity, and you bring up Brian Thomas Jr., you bring up Travis Etienne, who I expected you to say. But as I've thought a lot about Jacksonville and what team they were going to be this year, I was mindful of some of the new pieces that they have on the offense, but I kept on saying to myself, well, they got Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk. Well, Evan Ingram, obviously, the pre-game injury kept him out last week, but Christian Kirk, 2 catches in 2 games. Like, what's happening there?
Drops against Miami. And that's what I talk about extending possessions. He had a drop on 3rd down. If they keep that, Miami probably doesn't win. Travis Etienne fumbled too. They don't win if Travis Etienne just walks into the end zone and makes it 24-7. But you think back, we only think about plays that are missed at the end of games. There are plays at the beginning of games too on 3rd down that if you convert them, it causes the game to go in a totally different direction. Yeah. And then just last week, Denzel Ward knows they weren't letting him get open. Last week, Christian Kirk, he might as well not even have been out there, because it was tough sledding for everyone because Trevor was running for his life again. But the couple of times that they did hit something, you saw some max protection. You saw it when Myles Garrett was not in the game and his rotation was in. They were able to get downfield. And then you saw at the end of the game when they were on the 2-yard line, they went for a little slant and go that was wide open, but Trevor didn't have a chance to get to it, and he got sacked for a safety. So they just have to know that they have to come out and get their best players involved. And right now, Evan Ingram, even in week 1, wasn't considered one of their best players that day, and neither was Christian Kirk. And it's perplexing, because you would have thought coming into the year that those guys would be the leaders, and then you sprinkle in and bring Brian Thomas Jr. along slowly. That hasn't materialized. It's clear that he's the most talented weapon on that team other than Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, he's got some vertical elements to his game that are really impressive. And I wondered, I'm a draft guy, Tony. Yeah. So I was wondering about Brian Thomas, because you watch him at LSU, it's like, man, this is really good. He can run by everyone and catch the ball down the field, but like, how much more is there to his game? I think that they've already unlocked a lot of that. And I think he's got a lot of potential, and he's certainly shown that through 2 games. Tony, when I think about the keys for the Bills to get their 3rd win of the season, 3 things come to mind. Number 1 for me is that the Bills offensive tackles need to meet the moment. Bills extended both of their tackles this offseason. Deion Dawkins at left tackle, who I think is developed into one of the premier offensive linemen in the league. And then right tackle Spencer Brown entering his 4th season. He was scheduled to be a free agent after the year, and the Bills went ahead and extended him to a big contract, $18 million a season. You got an expensive pair of tackles. They've been great through 2 games. We're also talking about Arizona, who doesn't have much in the way of edge rushing talent, and Miami, who, Jalen Phillips is a great player, but still coming back from the Achilles, and they don't have Bradley Chubb. They're playing rookies and Emmanuel Ogbah. They haven't been tested like they're going to be tested against Jacksonville with Joshua Hines Allen. So we no longer have Josh Allen and Josh Allen. I threw a celebration for that this offseason, man. That was tough to deal with. And then Trayvon Walker, number 1 pick entering year 3. I think he's kind of really stepping into his his stride here, a player that was always going to need a little time. The appeal there was always the upside with the physical traits. And I think you start to see that manifest itself into playmaking. And so that's a big test. It's a new test for this Bills offensive line. And so I think they're going to be really important. So the offensive tackles for the Bills need to meet the moment. Number two is they got to be able to beat man coverage. Like we've already kind of talked about, it's a new test for Buffalo. They've not seen man coverage like this yet this season. And, I think it's obviously going to hurt Jacksonville to not have Tyson Campbell. But, I think one of the fair questions that people might have about the Bills is, do they have wide receivers that can consistently beat man coverage? Well, we're going to find out. Now, I think there's some challenges with playing a lot of man coverage. I think that opens the door for Josh Allen to maybe run the football. Is that offset by, his left hand and the injury that he's kind of playing through there? Is that going to limit his appetite to run? We'll find out. But if receivers can beat man coverage, that's going to be important. I'm looking at Khalil Shakir. I'm looking at Dalton Kincaid, looking at Curtis Samuel as the players that need to be the catalysts in that capacity. Number three for me is disciplined defense. I hate to use the word desperate in week 3, but Tony, they can't fall to 0-3, the Jaguars. That's a tough spot to be. I know that they've gotten out of some holes in the past, right? But that's going to be a really, really tough situation, especially listening to Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence coming out of the Cleveland game and the messaging. It feels like this is a huge moment for Jacksonville in this season. And maybe a road trip against, an AFC contender is exactly what they want to get their season on track. And I think the Bills need to be ready for, to some level, a desperate Jacksonville team that's looking to get their, to get the season going. And Doug Peterson, I have questions about him. I think in 2 situations now we've seen the more his fingerprints get on an operation, the worse it gets. I thought he caught lightning in a bottle in 2017. Yeah. And congratulations, they won the Super Bowl. And that's going to get you a lot of opportunity. But I'm concerned how things played out in Philly. I'm concerned how things are playing out in Jacksonville. I will say this, though. He's creative. Yeah. And so what does he have up his sleeve to try to find an edge against the Bills, who have a lot of newness on the defensive side of the football, including having to play several backups in the back 7 due to injuries? And so you better be disciplined and be ready to handle any curveballs that come your way from Doug Peterson and the Jaguars. Yeah,
you made a very interesting point about our defensive linemen. And I could echo that about yours because, with, I hope I say his name correctly, Ebenezer or Epinesa or the kid Boudreaux from Miami. And then Von Miller can still give it to you. He said, he's been showing it that if you forget about him, he's still, I think, a first ballot Hall of Famer with a bullet who still has some stuff in his system. But they just play in a certain way, man. They play. They just have this identity. It's like a computer program, and they're gonna go out and be themselves. That's the reason why I think it's going to be hard for the Jaguars to win, because they're still searching. Now, in that searching, they're a very talented team that can make explosive plays out of the passing game with Travis Etienne, the run game with Travis Etienne, and of course we mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. And it'll be just my luck and your luck that Christian Kirk steps up and has a big game this week, right? That's usually the way it works. I'm sitting there poo-pooing him, and you ask about him, and then all of a sudden he steps up and he does exactly what you're afraid he might do.
Well, an interesting game. The Bills looking to get to 3-0. The Jaguars looking for their first win of the season and to get things on track. That's going to do it for us here today on this episode, but plenty of pre- and post-game coverage coming from both Locked On Bills and Locked On Jaguars. So make sure that you are following, that you're subscribed, and of course, we'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, folks, and we'll catch up with you again real soon.